Welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from September 9th, 2022, and I'm recording this on March 10th, 2023. I give you those dates so you know when this information is actually relevant because the market is always moving and shifting around. So these numbers could definitely change pretty quickly, as you'll see as we talk about just 6 months of change in some of these books. As always, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. I use those two lists. I've been using them for just over 4 years now to get a swath of the books that are basically reacting to the new hot books that are just released, whether it's for their cover or some sort of key, the books that have been optioned, the books that are hitting the market because we got news about a movie, whatever the factor is that's made a book jump in a given week. Those two lists are the ones I use. And then we look back 6 months later to evaluate what was the factor that made them hit the list, and then what has happened since to see so we make better decisions about which books we chase in the moment and which books we're patient on. So with that, we got 19 books. Let's dig into these lists. First up, we have Amazing Spider-Man number 36, the 9/11 book. Every September, this book hits the list. It's an annual cycle on this one. Back then, it was going for $85, 9.8 up to $195. Now it's a $30 to $60 book. 9.8 going for $160. So a down and a trap, definitely on the raw side. This is an annual cycle with this book. If you want to buy a book, any book really that's related to a date or a time of year, buy it at a different date or a different time of year when people aren't thinking about it. That's just, it's a constant pattern with this particular book and other books that are similar related to some sort of date. Next, we have another book that was hitting the list because of a date, and that was Batman 89 number 1. And that hit the list sort of because the Batman 89 movie was being re-released for Batman Day for 1 day only. So it caused people to kind of chase this comic. Just mostly hit the list because of a lot of sales. Raw copies were up to 15 on average. 9.8 went for 71, not super high. Now it's a $5 to $15 book. 9.8 going for 85, but that's a single sale, so hard to really judge anything there. But really just a down and I'll be back on the raw side. No real surprise there in this particular book. So next we have Black Atlas, number 1 from 1984. And CBSI put this on the list, but they didn't really know why it was hitting the list. Maybe just because it's hard to find. That seemed to be their best guess. But back then, there was a raw copy that went for $250, and then the next one went for $349, and then there were no other listings at the moment. So that's why they were kind of putting it on the list. It jumped pretty high prices, because prior to that, wasn't anywhere close to that. And it's not anywhere close to that now. It's the most recent sales have all been 60 to 80. Definitely kind of turned into a dumpster fire if you paid $350 or even $250 for this particular book. Apparently people saw those sales, saw it on the list and started listing it. And yeah, the prices have come down. Not that hard to find as people thought. Next, we had Bee and Puppycat, number 1. And this hit the list because the second season of this show finally dropped after 8 years. So that's what caused this book to hit the list. Back then, raw copies were going for $25 to $30. Now it's a $10 to $40 book. It had been steady in the $30 to $40, and then the most recent sales have been $10, $15, $20-ish. So it's kind of been on the low end after it being steady kind of through the winter at $30, $40. So we're going to put this kind of as steady. I'll be back. Right now, you've been able to, most recently, it's been a little bit of a deal. But this book is definitely it even went up for a little bit after it hit the list. So, but now it seems to be coming back down. So definitely one I would be, watching and be patient on if you want this book for some reason. Next, we have Dragon Ball, number 1 from 1998, the first American comic of Dragon Ball. And this hit the list because we had the movie release. Was it Superhero, Dragon Ball Superhero? I don't remember what the movie title was now. But back then, raw copies were averaging $550, which was up from kind of a $2 to $250 range, which is where they'd been. Now, little all over the place. Recent raw copy sales anywhere from $100 to $500. I kid you not, big wide range on this. 9.8, 800 to 1,000, a little closer together. So overall, I put this as a down and I'll be back. Obviously, some of those cheaper sales probably has to do with condition. I don't always look at every condition for every sale. So, but definitely an I'll be back, as you definitely can get some deals on this and more more in the range of that 250 range than the 500, but there are still some pretty high sales for high grade copies. Next, we have Starslayer #2, the first appearance of the Rocketeer. And this was basically, we kind of got a little bit of an update that we are getting a Rocketeer series at D23. So it caused us to hit the list again. This was still down from some of its peaks in 21, even when it hit the list. Raw copies were going for 20. 9.8 went for $2.95. Now it's a $10 to $20 book. 9.8, $2 to $2.25. So another down. I'll be back. Borderline trap on the 9.8 side, but yeah, just definitely a down end, and I'll be back on this first Rocketeer. Next, the next couple of books I'll hit the list because they're CGC announced another Todd McFarlane signing. I guess at this point, the only way you can get his books authenticated and put in a CGC slab is if you do it through one of these signings. If he does it at a con, he'll sign it, but you can't slab it. So yeah, so a bunch of people sent it in. The first book on these that we're talking about is Spawn #1, obviously for McFarlane. First appearance of Spawn, but the signing is why it was hitting the list. Raw copies were going for 30, 9.8 going for 2 to 220. Raw copies now are kind of 10 to 30, 9.8, 120 to 160. So another kind of down, and I'll be back for sure on Spawn #1. Next up on the McFarlane books hitting the list is Amazing Spider-Man #325. Not a cover I really think of for McFarlane. I don't know, is this maybe his last ASM cover? Not 100% sure on that. But this one hit the list. Raw copies going for $10 as the cat is making all kinds of noise now. 9.8 going for $3.25. Now it's a $5 to $15 book with a 9.8 going for, I lost my place, $190. So definitely an I'll be back on the raw side, trap on the 9.8 side. But definitely a book that is down and been dropping. Sorry, Miss Cat, you can't sit in front of the camera. Next, we have the last McFarlane book. We have Batman #423. Obviously, this was kind of hitting the list. We also just recently had that foil book that we talked about, the foil reprint of this book. But the regular cover with the McFarlane signing and the renewed interest because of the foil hit an all-time high at a 9.8 for $3,200. Most recent 9.8 sales all the way down to $2,500. 50 to 250 for raw copies of this, obviously based on condition. So overall, I put this kind of a down, and I'll be back. You could argue maybe trap, just not enough 9.8 sales to really say that it's really adjusted way down from that $3,200 price. All right, with that, we're going to move into our few other covers that aren't McFarlane related. And first up, we have Batman Dear Detective #1, the Lieber Majo 1 in 50 foil. So this is a foil cover. We've had several DC foils have been hitting the list a lot recently. Back then, this foil 1 in 50 foil, though it released, was only doing 55 to 65 and still made the list. But if 1 in 50 going for right at ratio or just slightly above, is usually a trap. This is actually a dumpster fire, as it's now a $15 to $30 book for this foil. As more than a 50% drop on this one, and definitely a book that was not worth chasing at the higher prices. Next, we have Detective Comics 1062, the second print Julio Tedesco 1 in 25 foil. Back then, raw copies were going for 100 plus on this 1 in 25, which is usually a good sign. But based on the rules, but no, this one didn't hold either. Only 2 recent sales. Listings are pretty high here, but only recent sales 25 and 87, so a wide range on those 2 sales, but those are the only 2 sales. Another book definitely turned into a trap. Really a trap even at the $87, well, probably an I'll be back at the $87 price, but yeah, just not enough sales. And there's listings for less than $100, and yeah, this book just isn't really going for a whole lot. Next, we have Sabrina Anniversary Spectacular #1, the Dan Parent variant limited to 200, which is a homage, of course, to the Dave Stevens Planet Comics cover. Back then, raw copies of this thing were going for $230 to $300. Now, only one recent sale went for $190, and it's listed for less than $190. So I'm putting this as definitely a trap. There was a $140 listing, a $160 listing. There were several listings well under $200, and yeah, there's still just the one sale. So not a lot of movement on this one. Definitely a book that's turned into a trap. Next, our last cover of the week is Gun Honey Blood for Blood #1. The Artgerm Virgin Foil variant, limited to 500. This was doing 80 to 85 back then. Now it's a $50 to $75 book, 9.8 for 100, which is pretty low for a $50 to $75 book, but just not a ton of interest here, not a ton of sales, but down and I'll be back. It's still holding a pretty good value, just not near what it was when we first had hit the list. All right, we're through 13 bucks. We still have 6 bucks to go. Jeez Louise. 19 is always a long week. And next we have a couple of Comic Buzz books. We have Thor #411, first appearance of the New Warriors, and particularly Night Thrasher, because basically there's people talking about Night Thrasher could be the next Iron Man. I don't know. There was some weird stuff going on. Anyway, it caused this book to jump to a $30 to $40+ book, 9.8 hitting 300. This book has never been that. This turned into a dumpster fire, which is worse than the trap I even predicted. 5 to 20 with most of the sales on the 10 to 5 side and not the 20 side. 9.8, 190. Yeah, definitely not a book that was worth going after. These New Warriors characters have never really carried a lot of value. Next, we have one book that was on the list last week. This is the Fantastic Four Full Circle, the hardcover slipcase by Alex Ross that was limited to 3,000. Back then, raw copy. So in week 2, so from week 1 values, it was actually, worth it. And I think I called it worth it and maybe even up. Week 2 values, 120 to 150, significantly up from that week 1. Now it's a 70 to 115, so definitely a down, and I'll be back, as it is not going to the values that it got to in week 2. So even for a hardcover, those week 2 peaks, if something hits the list multiple weeks in a row, you usually figure it's going to settle either around the week 1 value or between the week 1 and week 2, but the week 2 is almost always too high. Next, we have Batman, The Killing Joke #1, the first print. This hit the list because we're the announcement of the new One Bad Day series that's been coming out over the last several months. Is they've done a One Bad Day series for every kind of, almost all the Batman villains, not all of them, but a lot of them. Back then, it caused, renewed interest into The Killing Joke because it's kind of taking that same premise. Raw copies were going for 100, 9.8 going for 315. Now it's back down kind of where the long-term average is, 40 to 75 for a raw copy, 2 to 250 for a 9.8. So a trap on this one, even though a story that a lot of people love. I won't say a great story. I'm not one of those people that love this one, but definitely a book that is down and worth avoiding when there was some news about it. 3 books left, all related to a little bit of MCU stuff. First up, we have Black Panther #1, the first appearance of Okoye. And this was basically rumors that she's going to get her own TV series. I think there's still some talk of that. I don't know if that's going to happen for sure or not. But it caused 9.8 on this book to jump to $400. Now raw copies are 5 to 20 with 9.8s going for 150. So yeah, that's a dumpster fire. Not a ton of sustained interest in Okoye after. This was all in the lead up to the Black Panther movie, plus there was rumors about her getting a series, so there was a lot of hype last fall for this book. It has not sustained since the movie has come and gone. Next, we have World War Hulk, Gamma Corps, #1, the first appearance of Gideon Wilson, who made a cameo, was in She-Hulk briefly. Back then, it caused a lot of sales, not a big value jump, but because it was only doing basically cover price. Now it's basically $1 to cover price, so you could call this an I'll be back, but it's not super low. Wasn't going for super much then, but just not many sales now, so it definitely has cooled off in terms of sales. And then our last book is Defenders #17, the first appearance of the Wrecking Crew. We did get a version of the Wrecking Crew in She-Hulk. I think most people were mad about it. I thought it was fine because I never cared much about the Wrecking Crew anyway. But raw copies back then were average at 65. 9.6 jumped all the way to 600. Now, raw copies are 5 to 50. No recent really high-grade sales to even compare this to. I think the highest graded sale I saw on eBay was like a 9.0. So we really can't really compare that. So definitely, but still a down and a trap on those raw sales for sure. So that is this week's list. Once again, no books that went up. Only, one book that was steady? Yeah, one steady book and everything else was down at least a little bit. That has been the pattern now for over a year. It's basically all of 22 and now into 23. Books have just been declining. The market's been adjusting back from the COVID crazy prices. But I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you next time.